let's have a look at Horus's cloak. For this, I want a slightly desaturated red. I do not want to push the contrast, so I don't want to go from pure black to pure white, because this is a fabric, and unless it is threaded through with silk or golden material, it won't have that sheen, that luster. I imagine Horus's cloak would be quite Spartan in nature, almost like a Roman legionnaire, Roman legionnaire's cloak. So that's what I wanted to have on this. So I've started with a base coat of grey, and then I've used bloody red from scale 75. Next up we have Elendil Violet to shade the red. I'm using Elendil Violet because it is quite a dark colour. It has quite a lot of black in there as well as the purple, and it will give a bit more colour interest to those shadows rather than mixing pure black in with the red. Airbrush these into all the gaps, into all the shadows. It does help test fit in the miniature beforehand to see where the final shadows would rest on the miniature once it is fully attached. I've left it separate from the miniature itself for ease of painting. The next stage you may find a bit unusual, but it's to add a greater lightness to the colours we put on top of this. So we're going in with a Medea Combat White. I'm airbrushing this on top of the folds of the cloak to give an artificial sense of a highlight. And when we put a red on top of this, it will have a brighter sheen to it, a brighter colour on top. Next up we are using Blood Red from scale 75, Bloody Red, and when this airbrushes on top of the cloak it will give a much more vibrant appearance than it would do if we didn't have that intervening layer of white. Make sure you hit the highlights, midtones and lower midtones. The only portion we do not want to hit with the airbrush is the darkest shadows. But because the layers are so thin, even if we do overlap into the darkest shadows, it doesn't matter that much. We will need 2 to 3 coats of this to give a nice consistent even coverage to the cloak. Add bronze flesh from Vallejo to the previous mixture and some Forge World thinner. Mix it all up together and that will be our first highlight. I'm trying to stay within the same hue as much as possible so that I give the impression of a desaturated highlighting scheme, rather than using another colour, say orange, that will push the hues around the colour wheel. I want to stay within the same red and modulate it with bronze flesh, white and black, and Elendil violet in the shadows. And that's it for the cloak. So let's move on to the wolf pelt. I'm using Nakar from a scale of 75 and Field Blue, and I've just added 2 to 3 consistent coats with a brush on the wolf pelt portion. Once this is dry, I can start to add more white into the mixture to highlight the miniature. I would highly recommend you find a photo of a white wolf or a wolf, whatever colour wolf you wish to do Horus CLoak in, on Google Images, and try and recreate that as much as possible. For the initial layers, just try and put down the light and shadow transitions. Don't worry too much about the blending process, that will come later on. Just make sure that the right colour balance is placed on initially. In this case, I want to create a white wolf. So as you can see on the bottom lower of the wolf pelt, we will need a few more layers to make it more consistent. Which I've done off camera. So coming back to it, it's a lot more consistent. I can come in with more white mixed into the previous mixture of Nakar and Field Blue by Tamia. I'm using the brush almost like a faux dry brush. It's picking up on the highest points of light, but it's not picking out the individual portions of the sculpt itself. It's just getting a very generalized sweep of the sculpt, establishing the light and the shadow. The further along we go along the painting process, the more defined and refined these singular hairs will become. So as we go along, decrease the amount of moisture in your brush until you're using it nearly as a pure dry brush. Okay, next step, I have gloss varnished the miniature, and I'm adding micro sol to the cloak. I want to add an Eye of Horus there. So it's essential that you use warm water to help separate the transfer away from the backing sheet. Add it on top of the surface, which you've pre-moistened with the micro sol. Place it down as neatly as you possibly can, allow it to set for a few moments, then use micro set to finish off. Feel free to add oil paints to the cloak itself, just to give further definition to the individual hairs, and you can reapply white just in the same way as we did with Horus's armor, where we applied a gloss varnish and then we added then we added a layer of oil wash on top of it, pin wash. Then we came back with a brush just to refine the upper highlights. Do that with the cloak. For the eyes, I've chosen to use Scufferulous Brown from Vallejo. It's a bit of a mouthful. And then I'll add a black dot in the centre, as well as adding black to the nose. For the claws, I've used Iroko from the wood and leather set by Scale 75 as a base layer. From here you can add Agrax Earthshade into the shadows and re-highlight with Iroko. So a short and sweet video for you guys. Thank you so much for joining in. The next part should be up shortly. I'll catch you again, and make sure you send me lots of photographs of this if you do manage, or you do get around to painting your own Horus using this as a guide. Thanks.